All right, now talking about transparency and accountability, can I say, our next guest will be talking about that as well. One of the things that has bedeviled us in fact, been a major contributor to the rate of inflation in this country has been rates and insurance. And yesterday we talked about insurance. Today we're going to talk about rates. When the new government came in, it suggested that local government was in a bit of a shambles and they were going to do something about it, but I haven't seen anything that would suggest that. And certainly you would have been experienced double-digit rate increases throughout much of the country over the last 3 or 4 years, perhaps even longer in some of your cases. And it's got to the stage where you're looking at rates that are going to become unaffordable soon in good sections of the economy because they are 5, 6 times, 7 times, sometimes in some cases 7, 8 times the rate of inflation. And if you've got an inflation-based income and you are on a fixed income and you own your own home, you're in trouble, just quietly, at the moment, particularly if you were dependent upon national superannuation or some sort of fixed superannuation income. Well, as a result of that, a number of agencies, including the Taxpayers Union, have suggested that capping rates is a really good idea. The idea that you can't charge more than, say, twice the rate of inflation, as an example, or even the rate of inflation in some particular cases. And the government has suggested through its previous Local Government New Zealand member, but we'll see what the new one thinks, that this isn't a bad idea and should at least be explored. As you would expect, Local Government New Zealand, who have largely acted as apologists, I have to say, for huge rate increases in this country, are not keen. But what it means for you and where we go over the transparency issue and over accountability and whether or not a rates cap, which seems to be a pretty blunt instrument, is going to be a good thing. We're joined by Local Government New Zealand representative, provincial sector chair for Local Government New Zealand, the Plymouth District Council Mayor Neil Holdom, who joins us now. Neil, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for joining us.
G'day, Michael. How you doing?
I'm very, very well. Listen, before we go on and talk about this, I'm interested to know, have you managed to get Christchurch and Auckland back in the tent yet and joining Local Government New Zealand?
No, they haven't. No, and I mean, well, Christchurch only recently left, and Wayne's been pretty clear that, I mean, given that he's actually just about the size of all the other councils put together, he's got nothing against Local Government New Zealand, but he's happy to deal direct.
Yeah, I guess that's, yeah. Are they the only two councils that have left the LGNZ?
No, there's a few.
Oh, okay.
So I think Kaipara and West Coast.
Okay. So given that, is there any suggestion that it's because the LGNZ's not working effectively, or has that meant, and I can imagine it would have to mean, wouldn't it, that would mean that if those large councils have pulled out and just a couple of the smaller ones you've mentioned there, that the fees to join LGNZ for your constituent councils would have increased to compensate for that, would they?
Yeah, they probably have. Yeah, well, they have, and but I don't think fees were the issue. It's obviously, you know, Auckland had a view that representing 1.7 million people, they're pretty happy to go it alone. I'm not sure what the reasons for the other councils were. I think they're, you know, they can talk to their own stuff.
From your point of view as the Mayor of New Plymouth, do you think you get value for money out of LGNZ? Can they do things that you can't do as a council?
Yeah, I think absolutely we do. And I think that, you know, in any sector, like the professional organisations, if you think about it, you know, I come from the energy sector background. A lot of my peers were, you know, the Engineers Association. All organisations have their kind of professional associations where they're looking to set standards, but also I think particularly, like, you know, I've just made a submission to a select committee today about offshore offshore wind consenting. And we're lucky. New Plymouth District Council's kind of, I don't know, we're about the 10th or 11th biggest council in New Zealand. So we've got, a team that can draft up submissions on law changes that impact our area. But when you think, one of my peer councils, Stratford, they've got a population of 10,600 people that they're supporting. So having a sector organisation that can prepare submissions, generic ones for councils to then just grab and modify for their own, and so that they can participate in basically shaping legislation, those sort of things, comparing best practice. These things are important. They're replicated in every other industry in New Zealand, and I believe there's real value in it.
Okay. If you needed, though, as the Mayor of New Plymouth to go and raise a specific Taranaki-based or a New Plymouth thing, do you have confidence that you can just ring your phone and talk to the relevant minister and set up an appointment, go and see them about it?
Yeah, generally. I mean, I have for years. I think it's we're fortunate, as I say, with councils. We're in a growth area, which the Beehive's interested in areas that have got high growth. Because that's just the focus of central government. So we've never had any difficulty building those relationships, and I've got to know the people, whether when they're in government, when they're in opposition, and spend the time investing in the relationship. So I can pick up the phone, or we can get meetings when we need to. But as I say, I think that there is an advantage to working as a group in terms of supporting smaller members, but also that the advantages that come from collaborating and going to government on issues that are important with a single voice.
Okay, now as you would have heard in my introductory remarks, the impost of rates, local government rates upon many households in this country has been alarming. In fact, I can't imagine a time that I've been living, probably neither can you either, Neil, in which annual rate increases have been the scale that they've been over the last 3 or 4 years in this country. And obviously, this has led to the suggestion in certain quarters of a rates cap. In other words, a ceiling at which you may not expand over in terms of imposing those costs upon your local councils. What's the view of LGNZ as to that impost?
Well, I think it's about what you're trying to achieve, and I can give you a time in history for New Plymouth. So back in the 1980s, David Lean was the mayor. He ran a referendum actually and said, do we build a sewage treatment plant? Because back then we just used to wait till high tide. We had some big tanks by the coast, and at high tide we just turned the floodgates on and all of it, just raw sewage, and just let it go out with the tide. And Daisy was a surfer, got sick of getting sick. It was part of Surf Club, and so they had a referendum and they put rates up 39%, and built what is still a first-class wastewater treatment plant. So there have actually been significantly high rate increases back in the 80s when we had double-digit inflation, and some people will remember that. But I think if you reflect on, I'll just use New Plymouth as a case study, right? So I've been the mayor here for about 8 years, and the reason I came to council was a lack of investment in water and wastewater infrastructure, and we basically, the council didn't have information on the assets that it had. It wasn't spending any money on them. There wasn't a great deal of appreciation for the importance of the stuff, and there was concern that we were running out of water. We went and did some work and found that there was basically $260 million worth of assets that needed to be replaced. So they're completely at their end of their life, they're leaking, they're causing problems, that hadn't been replaced. And that work, we finished that about 4 years ago, identifying that work. And realistically, that was a backlog that the New Zealand Infrastructure Commission will point out. Basically, we stopped investing in infrastructure after the 70s for about 25 years. And there was a view that we didn't want rates to go up, so we just didn't do it. And it's underground, and no one really notices. And you can sweat things for a while, But we're at this point now where, and yes, you're right, we have put through double-digit rate increases because we're not just investing to build new houses, because it costs us about $100,000, between $80,000 and $100,000 to put the infrastructure in the ground for a brand new house in a new subdivision right now. But we're also playing catch up because when it rains heavily and water comes into our wastewater network, we overwhelm that sewage treatment plant that we built and we tip partially treated sewage into the ocean.
Sorry, are you
And
telling
that's
me that
because
in New
basically
Plymouth you haven't separated your wastewater from your sewage, from your
in
stormwater?
every wastewater system in New Zealand, when it rains, you get what's called water ingress. Yeah, we've separated the stormwater network and the wastewater network, but when it rains, the water pressure in the ground increases, and we get water in the wastewater network. It overwhelms the capacity of the plant to process. So we kind of filter and dose, but we don't do the full treatment, and we discharge to the
So
ocean.
you're
And I
going to
think you'll
have
find
to
that happens.
expand, one presumes, your wastewater treatment plant.
Wastewater
I
treatment plant. Yep.